This week on Business Brief, we learn about a policy providing tax deductions for tipped workers. Then we hear about the latest developments in the launch of legal sports gambling in Missouri. Welcome back to Business Brief, Missouri Business Alert's podcast focused on the business news and issues shaping the state. My name is Yasha Mikowajczuk, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Noah Grabianski. You've been running around a lot today, Yasha. What are you reporting on?
Well, I'm actually reporting on the nuclear summit that's taking place in the Missouri Theater here in Columbia. We'll see what's going on, going in and out, and kind of I'm focused on learning the business side of all this. What does this mean for jobs? What are the economic opportunities? I got a little background of a Nuclear 101, but I'm excited to see what else I'm going to learn.
Nuclear 101, that sounds exciting. All right, let's get into the headlines.
Absolutely. President Donald Trump announced Saturday that he's levying 30% tariffs on goods from the EU and Mexico set to go into effect August 1st. This comes after Trump said Mexico hasn't done enough to stop North America from turning into a, quote, narco-trafficking playground, end quote, and called the U.S. trade deficit with the EU a national threat. Experts expect higher tariffs and counter tariffs could substantially upset trade with two of the country's largest trading partners. Since this announcement, both the EU and Mexico have been working with the U.S. to establish new trade parameters before the tariffs take effect.
Foreign direct investment in the United States dropped to its lowest level since 2020. Foreign investors spent a total of $151 billion on U.S. businesses in 2024, which is a drop of over 14% from the prior year. This marks the third year in a row foreign direct investment has declined. Missouri counted for nearly 4,000 of the over 200,000 jobs that resulted from foreign investment in 2024, which was the highest among the 7 states that make up the Plains area. All of those Missouri positions were from business acquisitions rather than new job creation.
President Donald Trump and Education Secretary Linda McMahon are now free to execute nearly 1,400 layoffs in the federal education department. This comes after the U.S. Supreme Court paused a lower court order that questioned the legality of delegating the department's responsibilities across other federal agencies. While only Congress has authority to fully close the department, the U.S. Treasury is likely to take on management of the $1.6 trillion student loan portfolio that affects 43 million borrowers.
After months of negotiation, MU Healthcare and Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield reached a deal Tuesday afternoon, restoring in-network access for around 90,000 patients in mid-Missouri. Full contract documents are currently being prepared, but both companies are anticipating execution within the next couple of weeks. Anthem customers will be able to access MU Healthcare services at an in-network rate immediately. The new agreement will not include Anthem's Medicare Advantage HMO and PPO plans.
Governor Mike Kehoe signed legislation Monday prohibiting the export of water outside Missouri state lines without a permit. The legislation also puts limits on withdrawing water for export through pipeline facilities and requires annual reporting of exported water volumes and withdrawal rates. Kehoe has been signing numerous pieces of legislation throughout the past week, including one which allows the Missouri Farm Bureau to sell health care plans to its members and one banning the sale of invasive plants.
Members of an interim Missouri House Committee on Property Tax Reform met for the first time on Wednesday, but the head of the committee says it's doubtful they'll finish their work between now and a potential special session in September. This comes after the Missouri General Assembly passed some property tax changes in June that didn't apply statewide. The 20 committee members have varying opinions on these property tax changes and are hosting 5 more meetings across the state to gather testimony from residents and local officials.
So Noah, I know last week I talked about the One Big Beautiful Bill as I was looking at its impacts on the solar industry.
Yeah, with that bill being over 1,000 pages, I know there is a lot to it. Did something else happen to catch your eye?
Yeah, in my conversations with one of the experts from last week's story, we ended up talking about the, quote, no tax on tips policy that was included in the bill.
No taxes on tips. Why does that sound familiar?
Well, it was one of President Donald Trump's campaign promises last year, but instead of eliminating taxes, the bill offers a temporary deduction for up to $25,000 in reported tip income from federal income taxes for eligible workers applicable from tax years 2025 through 2028. However, I won't deny, tax policy can be dense. So I spoke to Adam Rosenzweig, who's a professor of law from Washington University in St. Louis. Here's part of our conversation. So, kind of right off the bat, would you be able to sort of explain the changes that the One Big Beautiful Bill has made?
So, prior to this rule, the general rule under the Internal Revenue Code, under Section 61, says that gross income means all income from whatever source derived, which means any accession to wealth regardless whether it's in exchange for services or if you just find it or win the lottery. It's any increase in your wealth is considered gross income. And so, of course, tips would fall under that very broad umbrella because it's an increase in your wealth. In this case, received either from the customers directly or from the employer, depending on how they, set it up. So in the past, there had been some difficulty in kind of people reporting them or the IRS tracking them because a lot of times they were paid in cash. And so in the last 10 years or so, or 15 years, there had been a new set of reporting rules to require, employers to keep track of them and to report them, and so that employees would report them on their personal tax returns. But they were just included as income as any other income, including salary. What this provision does is it adds a new deduction. And that deduction is an amount of the so-called qualified tips that you receive per year up to $25,000. And that deduction is then, there's a special rule within this new provision that makes that deduction what is sometimes referred to as an above the line deduction. And all that means is that there are a lot of miscellaneous deductions that are subject to limits or caps or floors. By moving this one in particular to a so-called above the line deduction, it's not subject to any of those limits, but instead the provision implements its own series of rules, restrictions, and limits on this special $25,000 deduction.
So, how is this going to work for tipped workers?
If you're an employee and you are within one of those businesses that have been identified as traditionally receiving tips, then you are eligible for this deduction. But there are, as I mentioned before, there had been a lot of difficulty with documenting tips in the past. So they bring those reporting requirements in. So if I'm an employee who receives tips, I can only get this deduction if my employer reports them as tips to the government and reports them to me as part of my W-2 as a separate line as tips. So even if I receive tips, if my employer will not designate them as tips, I will not get the benefit of this provision. But really, the real limitation is the fact that it doesn't matter because if your employer doesn't report them as qualified tips, it doesn't matter if I understand it or not. I can't claim them.
Right.
So they're really relying on that reporting requirement to do most of the work on who will claim them and who won't.
What is this policy change for the average server, the average waiter, the average person who kind of relies on these tips as part of their livelihood?
The value of deduction turns entirely on what tax you would have paid absent the deduction, right? So if without the deduction, you'd have higher income. With the deduction, with that, so what tax you would pay depends on what bracket you're in. So if I was earning tips as a part-time worker and I'm in a 10% bracket, then the $25,000 deduction could save me 10% of $25,000. If I'm in a 37% bracket, it'll be worth a lot more, right? Um, but I don't know how many people who are traditionally receiving tips are in the very high brackets.
And what is this going to mean for tax season?
So the question here is, are we heading in a direction now we're going to start reintroducing more complexity into these above the line deductions and undermine some of the goals or benefits of that increased standard deduction? Or is this just a one-time kind of thing and it'll go away in 3 years and we'll go back to the system as it was before? That's a much harder question. Like, is this the beginning of uh, a new era of more complexity and more detailed record keeping requirements and et cetera? Or is this just a 3-year temporary benefit, say, as an economic stimulus or benefit to certain kind of low-income workers or whatever? That's a political question. We'll have to wait and see.
Our next story looks at the rollout of legal sports gambling in Missouri, and for that we turn to Missouri Business Alert reporter Charlie Warner. Charlie, welcome.
Good to be here.
Charlie, as we speak right now on Thursday afternoon, you are just back in the newsroom after a meeting of the state's gambling regulators in Jefferson City. I know you've been doing a lot of reporting on sports betting in Missouri, so what's the latest?
Well, as of this week, the Missouri Gaming Commission is one step closer to launching sports betting in the state. Tuesday was the deadline to apply for untethered licenses, also called direct mobile licenses. Those grant permission to provide online sports betting services in Missouri without being tethered to a physical casino. Think sports betting mobile apps and websites.
Gotcha. So who applied for those?
State officials received 3 applications, one from DraftKings, FanDuel, and Circa, all of whom operate online sports betting in different states across the country. Now, the bulk of the work remaining for the state gambling regulators is to run background investigations on applicants. Jan Zimmerman is the chairman of the Missouri Gaming Commission, the state's gambling regulator. She says that vetting is an extensive process.
It involves contacting, all of those individuals and companies that have applied for licensure with gaming to make sure that it's appropriate and they've been vetted properly.
Okay, so vetting gambling businesses is the next step in the process. But let's take a step back and look at the big picture. How do we get here and where are we headed?
Well, in November, Missouri voters narrowly approved a constitutional amendment legalizing sports gambling in the state. Missouri became the 39th state to legalize sports betting following years of unsuccessful attempts by lawmakers to pass laws legalizing it. The constitutional amendment required Missouri to launch sports betting by December 1st of 2025, but the industry and its supporters thought that would happen sooner.
I noticed you just said thought. I gather that maybe the industry's hopes for an expedited rollout haven't been realized quite yet.
So far, they have not been. The Missouri Gaming Commission was seeking an expedited process for finalizing the rules regulating sports gambling in the state, but the Missouri Secretary of State's office denied that. Pat Evans covers the gambling industry for Legal Sports Report. He says many other states have used expedited emergency rules to launch sports betting.
A lot of states will get emergency rules approved to launch quicker, which is what we saw the Missouri Gaming Commission hope for right as soon as it happened, said, hey, this will get going, we'll launch midsummer, then the initial rules the official rules will go into effect. Well, we're already launched and ready to go. That generally happens in a lot of states.
But it didn't happen in Missouri, so what's that mean?
For gambling companies, every day the launch is delayed is a day they're missing out on potential revenue. Sportsbooks make a lot of money around major seasons and events like the NFL season.
Of course, the sportsbooks definitely would have preferred to have the August 30th launch date to capture the week 1, but getting some of the football season is better than none of the football season.
But ultimately, sports betting will launch in Missouri, and the company's license to operate businesses here will begin making money.
So as I understand it, the untethered mobile operators we discussed earlier are just a part of the larger array of companies that will operate sports betting in Missouri. Who else is going to be part of that landscape?
Beyond the untethered licenses, there are retail, mobile, supplier, data provider, and occupational licenses. Parent companies that own the 13 casinos in the state and the 6 professional sports teams in the states can apply for retail and mobile licenses. Retail licenses are for physical casinos and these teams to have a sportsbook at their locations. Mobile licenses are for casino locations or sports teams to have an online sports betting service. The difference between mobile and untethered is that mobile licenses have to have operations in Missouri, whereas untethered licenses can fully operate through the internet. Supplier and data provider licenses are for companies that provide equipment or data that helps operate sportsbooks. The occupational licenses are just for casino employees that are licensed for other jobs in gaming but need to be approved to work in sports wagering areas. So far, Underdog has submitted an application for mobile licenses. Catalyst, a data provider, GLI, an independent testing lab, and GeoComply have all applied for supplier licenses. And as mentioned earlier, FanDuel, DraftKings, and Circa have all applied for those untethered licenses. More applications from teams like the Kansas City Chiefs or casino parent companies like Penn or Caesars will come through as the live date approaches.
Well, it sounds like there's lots more to come as sports betting gets off the ground in Missouri.
Indeed, it will be a busy couple of months until December.
Well, Charlie, thank you very much for coming in and giving us an update on sports betting. Now it's time for our words of the week. Yasha, what's your word?
My word this week is tampon tax.
Oh, did a new tax go into effect?
Quite the opposite, actually. Governor Mike Kehoe signed legislation last week that eliminates the so-called tampon tax on menstrual products and diapers. It cuts the tax by nearly 3/4 from just over 4% to just over 1%.
Wow, that's a pretty significant cut.
Yeah, it is. And experts say it represents a new way of thinking about these products as health necessities for women and families in Missouri.
So how does it make a difference?
It means that struggling families will be able to afford more diapers and menstrual products and avoid the health risks that come from using these products for longer than the recommended time due to not having enough. However, this new legislation doesn't stop municipalities from imposing their own additional taxes on these products. What's your word today, Noah?
My word today is 7-hydroxymetragenine.
One more time. Say that again.
7-hydroxymetragenine, or 7-OH for short. It's a substance made by chemically converting the element in kratom that induces opioid-like effects.
Why is it in the news this week?
Well, Shaman Botanicals LLC, a Kansas City-based company, is in hot water with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration after it said the firm is illegally marketing pills containing 7-OH because the chemical isn't safe or legal in dietary supplements or additives to foods. But the company insists that the products are safe after conducting 3 research studies on them.
How is 7-OH different from kratom or other opioid-like products?
Kratom contains trace amounts of 7-OH, but this company is making products with concentrated levels of the chemical. This comes after Missouri lawmakers tried to ban 7-OH products this spring, and the FDA has been cracking down on untested opioid-like products that have been appearing in smoke shops and gas stations.
Sounds like consumers will have to be on the lookout for these products.
They should. Now it's time for our closing thought.
Our closing thought today is from Adam Rosenzweig, a law professor at WashU, giving his thoughts on whether consumers and employers will change their tipping practices based on the new tax policies surrounding tips.
If this was permanent and bigger, then I would say almost certainly yes. Of course, both will change their behavior because they will have time to adjust to it and to change their business model. The question is whether it's worth it just for 3 years. And if I'm on the consumer side, if I have no idea whether you're actually going to get the tax benefit or not, should I change my behavior or just do what I have always done?
Well, that is all for this week. M33 Project and DeWolf provided the music for this episode. For my co-host Noah Grabianski and editors Kelly DeRook and Michael Stacy, I'm Yasha Mikołajczuk. Thank you for listening.